Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we've worked through this debate, I certainly appreciate everyone's viewpoints, and I'd like to thank my colleagues for sharing their personal stories. I know my former roommate, the gentleman from Armstrong County, that was not easy for him, and I have the deepest respect for him. And I have the deepest respect for all of you as individuals and those who are in the balcony. One of the things that I think that we've come to realize, though, here is that we as individuals can look at the same set of facts and sometimes arrive at different conclusions. And that, Mr. Speaker, is unfortunately where I am currently at. And I'll share some personal stories myself. I had a very close friend who I worked with for years at the hospital, was given less than a year to live with pancreatic cancer. I know that she did try medical marijuana, and it unfortunately didn't help her. But she'd still lived 8 more years. And as many of you know, I've consistently advocated for Lou Gehrig's disease, or ALS, a disease that both of my parents had. And Mr. Speaker, I have to tell you, seeing many of the patients and the diseases that are listed there, one of the problems that I have with the bill as currently drafted is the fact that we're picking winners and losers in terms of which disease or which patients get it and which don't. And I understand that there's a process in the future that goes forward that may expand those, upon the recommendation of the clinic. And I recently had a mother come in to advocate on behalf of the bill. And what she said to me was, look, I understand this is only state law. There's still some federal law issues. I would like to have the option of doing this for my children. And I understand that position. And perhaps if my own children were in a position, I too would advocate differently than I am now. Perhaps I would even move. I don't know what I would do. But I can tell you this, I do know that Lou Gehrig's disease in 5 to 7% of the cases is hereditary. At the time of my parents' diagnosis, genomes was not quite as advanced as it is today. And I don't know. At the time they tested negative for the gene, and I'll be honest, I'd rather just not know, because I'm going to live my life the way that I want to live my life. And I accept that. But thinking back to that mother's comments and having our eyes wide open in terms of what we're up against, I do have to highlight some concerns that have been brought up throughout the debate and the amendment process. I did vote for several of the other amendments that would have increased access to Epidiolex and some of the other medications, creating a closed health system amendment that was offered. And I certainly don't understand chemistry to the degree that the gentlelady from Chester referenced earlier, but I can tell you this. I do know that the FDA has a process. I also agree with the gentleman from Lebanon County that it's painfully slow. But when you look at the merits of what's before us, here's my concern. We're setting the path to bypass the FDA product approval process. Whether the drugs are good or bad, we're saying we're willing to circumvent that process, a process that's been in place for over 100 years, because it's what's needed now. And maybe that is the best decision. Some people look at that and arrive at the answer to be yes. I simply don't. And, I referenced previously, folks said clinical trials aren't advancing quick enough, and I would probably agree. I think there's a lot of life-saving drugs that aren't advancing through the process quick enough. But that doesn't mean that we should do this for everyone. And I referenced GW Pharmaceuticals, the company that just literally concluded their phase 3 trials and released results this week while we were debating the bill. 39% reduction in seizure activity for those who took the drug, Epidiolex, as compared to 13% with the placebo group. Sounds like it worked to me, but they are going through the current process that is there. And when I think to the mother's comments about having our eyes wide open as to what we're looking at going forward, here are some concerns that I don't believe have adequately been addressed And I think we all know how the vote's going to go. I've looked at the facts and arrived at my own decision to be a no vote. Many of you have looked at the facts and decided to be a yes vote, and that's fine. I think at the end of the day, we'll all still respect each other. We'll still work on other issues. But it's my hope that as the bill moves forward, that we take into consideration some of these issues. Banking. I know the gentleman from Philadelphia had an amendment because even though there's memorandums of understanding by the federal government, the reality is there's still a multitude of federal laws that are being enforced by a variety of federal agencies. The LA Times and Forbes both did articles on banking and the difficulties related to the credit markets and the fact that the marijuana businesses typically have to deal in large amounts of cash. You can look at the scope of practice issues, which is why, as we pointed out yesterday, that medical marijuana is recommended and not prescribed. That's similar to how Rhode Island's approach is. And the fact that pharmacists cannot handle this, which is why we have dispensaries. Most of this derives from the fact that it's a Class 1 or a Schedule 1 instead of a Schedule 2 substance. And the quickest route would be to reclassify it at the federal level. But going back to the gentleman's point from Lebanon, they haven't done that. As recently as this year, the federal government, Office of Personnel Management, issued the following guidance to their federal employees. Federal workforce remains unchanged at about 4.1 million federal employees to this day. And as recently as May of 2015, the federal government will still consider an illegal drug such as marijuana and possessing it and using it as a crime. You can get into unemployment law issues, which we talked briefly about through the amendment process. Colorado, California, and Michigan have all litigated this to different conclusions. Some say you do qualify for benefits, some do not. Property owners and landlords, the U.S. attorneys have said that they've made it clear property owners and landlords who rent or provide a location for medical marijuana dispensaries are subject to prosecution under 21 U.S.C. Section 856. Mr. Speaker, and probably one of the most concerning and unintended consequences, I think, is the impact that this could potentially have on patients who will unknowingly potentially commit federal crimes now because it is also illegal to own a firearm if you're under the influence or prescribed, or in this case, recommended medical marijuana. I was surprised when I learned that, but when you look at the law, there have been multiple cases. Federal law prohibits anyone who uses marijuana pursuant to medical marijuana law or not from possessing a firearm which has been part of interstate commerce. Further, gun dealers would be prohibited from selling a firearm to someone who they know uses medical marijuana. And that is actually a question for those of us who have went through background checks when we purchase firearms or when you apply for a concealed carry permit. That is a question. And my fear is our constituents, our friends, our neighbors will unknowingly answer that question incorrectly because they will think it's a medicine. And the federal government has made it very clear that that continues to be an issue. The issuance of a concealed carry permit under Section 18, or Title 18, Section 6109, Subsection 6 says an individual who's addicted to or is unlawful user of medical marijuana or a stimulant, and in this case medical marijuana, would be prohibited from applying for a permit or being granted a permit. There are a lot of things that we should talk about. We can talk about the efficacy of the medicine. We can talk about the emotions of those who are afflicted by diseases that need changed. My fear, Mr. Speaker, is that while this bill is well-intentioned, I cannot support it because of the conflicts with all of the existing federal laws. It's time that the federal government acts. I agree with the gentleman from Lebanon County. They need to reclassify this so that the studies can be done. And I realize that we have all arrived at different conclusions on this, but I think these are very real concerns that we need to take into serious consideration as we move forward. This will reach into our insurance laws, our unemployment laws. even landlord-tenant issues. And I don't believe that they've been adequately contemplated in the proposal before us. I will be a no, but I hope that those issues are corrected. And while I opened with this, and I said this from the very beginning, I recognize that we can look at this issue, the facts and the patients, and arrive at different conclusions. And I hope that you can understand where I'm coming from and why I cannot support this bill at this time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.